Hello, I'm Redmond Bacon, and this is Descent into British Cinema. Today we'll be looking at All My Friends Hate Me, the 2021 directorial debut of Andrew Gaynord, adapted from the script by two Toms, Mr. Palmer and Mr. Staunton. According to Variety, it's a furiously witty film, but Fred and I will be discussing if this is a great Britcom or just a total shitcom. It's Pete's birthday, and he's going to visit his friends, but he doesn't really know what to expect this weekend, resulting in a variety of hijinks.
You didn't hear that, did you? Has he been saying things about me? Hey, chill out. Sorry. I'm just paranoid about everything that happened yesterday.
They're all being mean.
Oh, whoops!
I just don't know what's going on.
You're just a bit anxious. That's nothing new, right?
This is for you, isn't it?
Yes.
And enjoy yourself, then.
You still don't know what the surprise is yet, do you?
Cheer up, mate. It's not loaded.
And so on. So, Fred, first things first, what kind of genre do you think this film occupies?
I saw comedy horror on Google, and I think that that pretty much comedy horror thriller, right, would be my guess. What about you? You looking at me?
Yeah, I think it's
you know better.
it's a comedy that uses horror tropes, right? So I can obviously see this massive Ben Wheatley influence coming in here, especially the Happy New Year Colin Burstead. Have you seen this movie?
No,
Oh,
I didn't.
it's a much better film than this one. And it's like all set in the New Year's Eve, and everyone's in a house, and the guy Colin Burstead. Originally, the film was called like Colin Burstead, You Tit, or no, You Anus. Colin You Anus was the original British name, but I guess that didn't really sell. And
Yeah.
that is much more slice of life. Everyone's a bit better drawn, and then they start really arguing. And
I
that
think
also feels like it's going to tip into horror, like Ben Wheatley's films usually do, but then it doesn't. So I can see the influence there, but that was more working class, middle class, more geezers, whereas this is much more about posh kind of people.
it kind of reminded me of in Inspector Calls at the end there, with the kind of reveal of who the person was, yada yada yada. JB Priestley vibes.
And Harry could be a type of inspector because he's making those notes on the police paper, isn't he?
Exactly. There was obviously the kind of class stuff going on there. I think the word pikey got thrown around. It felt like there was obviously this sort of undertone of class guilt sort of running through it, I felt.
Yeah, because the main character, whose name is Pete, I'm forgetting the movie already. This is a good start. So Pete is coming back after doing, I think it's probably just like maybe a gap year or like a couple years.
No. He's been working in a refugee camp because they hadn't seen each other for like 9 years, they keep saying. So it's like a sizable amount of time has gone by since they have known one another.
Where did he do it?
I don't know. It doesn't say refugees. It just keeps saying refugees.
It's just very generic.
Yeah. I mean, there is that kind of like vein of him feeling like awkward about the fact that he's done it and done that kind of work. I think we do have a disagreement because you seem to be saying it was shit.
No.
But let me just like, I was watching it with my housemate and we were like we just had like the ick, like so much, like it was fucking horrible to watch. Like I had such a visceral reaction to it. Like I thought it was like deeply unpleasant as a film. I didn't like it, but I still felt that it was good at creating that sense of anxiety. Like it was good at. I'm a very anxious person, and so is my housemate. And he was like, yeah, like that's like all of my worst nightmares, like on a screen. And he just hated it. Like he was like, why did you make me watch this movie? So it did do something. Like a reaction was created. But having said that, like it was definitely almost like watching a group of quite posh people that do like an amateur theatre society at night, and they've made a movie, and it's just like they almost didn't have the credentials to make a movie. It felt like it was not very well constructed. Like the characters were shit, the dialogue was crap. It was quite awkward, and like, things just fell down quite a lot. I felt it was kind of cheesy in a way.
And it is very British, the dialogue as well, because he calls himself like captain of the sesh or some shit like this.
But
The
having said that,
insults are quite British. The vibe, I wonder how it's translating. But according to Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, the Americans really loved this movie, and it was released in both the US and the UK and made around $80,000 with a release online about 2 weeks later. So it's done modestly well. It's just a question of whether it actually goes there and has an impact. My problem isn't so much the characters or the script, like dialogue from moment to moment, which I felt starts off pretty badly. Like the film started and I was like, Jesus Christ, what is this about?
yeah.
And then once you get the idea of the film and how it's as much about this character as it is about what's happening to him, and it's how he relates to his friends, I was very invested. But then by the end, I feel like it didn't really go anywhere, and it could have gone way more deep into it. But I think these, like you say, they're probably quite rich filmmakers. They're probably like well off. They're quite posh, or at least posh adjacent. And they want to make fun of these tropes, like the hunting and the rich house and the casual insults and the inherited wealth and all this crap. But then it doesn't really doesn't feel very revolutionary if
Thing
it
is,
were.
when I saw this movie, I was like, oh, what's the point? Like some rich people that made a movie about rich people and anxiety, like didn't really happen. But having said that, like I think most filmmakers probably are quite rich and always pretend that they're not, or take a subject matter which like so that they can disguise themselves essentially. So these people that have made the film are either so oblivious to the fact that of their own irrelevance that they just made the movie about themselves, or they are really conscious of who they are, and like all that they can really do as filmmakers is make like a film about themselves, and that's what they've done. So it's either it's like one of two things. If it's the second thing, I'm like, oh, it's kind of fair enough. Like, it's kind of worthy in a way. If it's the first thing, like they are just like fucking idiots. I don't know.
And this film got BFI funding as well. I mean, so I first encountered the film in an article written by a guy called Fedor Tot, who actually I've met, nice guy, and he has quite a funny opening to this article for Animus magazine. So I'll read it quickly. He says, much of UK made cinema from the last few years has felt increasingly unimaginative. On one side, you have the feel-good Richard Curtis-esque comedies, the Downton Abbeys and World War II adventures. I actually watched the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society the other day. Oh my God. Anyway, invariably starring any number of Colin Firth impersonators. On the other, you have the UK's independent filmmakers, a small army of young, early career directors lauded every year, usually, but not always, funded by the BFI or some cultural organization's funding pot. And this is where the lead gets funny. We can reliably put the Downton Abbey stuff to one side. It is what it is. But one would expect the independent stuff to be where we can find the more imaginative, interesting visions from the UK. Instead, we have All My Friends Hate Me.
The thing is, I think that's cheap because for the reasons I just said. Like, what else are they going to do as filmmakers? Like, that's just who they are. Like, what would you want?
I think it's unfair to hold one singular movie to a standard that it has to sort of become the future of British cinema. It's a bit unfair.
Yeah. Like, what the fuck?
I mean, I don't think the film is trying to do a Ken Loach. It's not trying to like destroy the upper class. It's just kind of here to make some jokes. And I think what it does get quite well is the friendships that are rooted in banter, and how the banter can just go to a point where you're like, now you're just being like outright mean. And this is a kind of banter that I do not see living here on the continent. It seems very British.
I was saying to my housemate when I was watching it, if I turned up at this party and my friends were like this, I would just go. Like I wouldn't stay there to continuously just be thrown, insults at. Yeah, so I felt like it was quite a good depiction of basically friendships that have gone stale, and there's like no real point of interaction for them, like authentic reaction. There's no warmness throughout, which is probably like, but then there were like moments where like the kind of that was cracked, like the seal was broken slightly, and then they did interact, and like there was warmth there. So I felt that was interesting. I don't know if you agree or disagree,
but I feel like they're trying to not gaslight, but the film itself is gaslighting this guy Pete, that they all hate him, but they don't actually hate him, but then they still say these things towards him. So there has to be some kind of reason that they feel this way towards him, which we don't really know in the end, which seems to be a bit silly. And there's the classic, TV shows and films about people who friends, they come meet up again, and then they realize they've got nothing in common. There's an episode of Girls where they go to a country house up in the Hamptons, and then they all start fighting, and in half an hour it does more than whatever All My Friends Hate Me does. But I would say, if I was put in a situation where I had to go shooting, I would feel just as uncomfortable as this guy, because shooting and hunting is the one thing which kind of unites these upper class toffs with the working class who like live there and live in the countryside, because it's a classic countryside thing, isn't it? You're from Plumpton, so
I can say that's true. I've never done it though. So I'm not the best.
Have you seen people do it?
Me and my dad once went to a shoot meet, and my dad was like, could my son have a go? And the man said no, he's not got a shotgun license, and we just had to leave.
What I noticed in this is that when they shoot the birds, they're not going to eat them or anything. It's purely for sport. It's purely just to kill them. And I thought it was very funny that he didn't manage to shoot a single one, and that really pissed everyone off. That was very nicely handled.
Yeah, I thought that with the beginning where you're introduced to the I guess the hunt keeper, whatever. So there's one initial meeting where he's chased by a faceless figure whose like identity is never really revealed in the film. Like you think it's a bad guy, but it's not. Then you meet this other huntsman. So there's like a staggered meeting of two people, which didn't really make. I felt like there could have just been one encounter with a strange individual. Instead, there's two, but there's also at the beginning there's like him with his girlfriend hanging out. So it takes like 3 beats before like he reaches this place, and then they don't turn up for ages. So like the beginning is just, I think it almost felt like there should have been like a script editor around to point out that this wouldn't really work.
And then this Harry geezer turns up, and we find out later on that he's actually this guy called Plank. But the problem with Plank is, do you remember who Plank is by the end of the film? Because they sort of mention this Plank guy, and then they're like, Plank. And then you're like, what happened with Plank? Did they bully Plank or not? Why is Plank so anti the guy? It didn't really make sense to me.
No, it didn't.
Although I would say this actor, Dustin Demery Burns, I thought he was really good.
I thought he was good. And I think I've met him. He used to go out with somebody that I know. He's very tall, and he made me feel pretty inadequate.
How old is he?
I think he's about 30 something.
He looks older than the rest of the gang, which is kind of what's confusing.
I wouldn't have said so. He sort of looks like 30 something.
He's 44.
No, he's not.
Yeah, he's 44.
Okay, fine. Then there's not the guy that I thought he was. Shit.
And then also just talking about the structure, that they play around with the guns a lot. Like the guy wants to go check out the guns, and then there's the false shooting, which we obviously know immediately is the friend, and it's a joke. And then they shoot the birds, and then the gun is never used again, which seems to break the rule of if you have a gun in the first act, you should use it by the third act. It's sort of a red herring in that respect, which all leads up to this final reveal, which is a roast where they have the fake Pete who decides to make fun of Pete, and you feel the uncomfortableness there. But then
Yeah.
even his girlfriend doesn't really stand up for him either. She sort of thinks it's fun as well, which is interesting because she's not much of a contrast with the other friends, which I guess is the
Yeah.
point, right?
Yeah, and she's kind of happy with the whole thing at the end. She agrees to marry him despite learning that he contributed to the death of this woman.
Yeah, that was fucked up.
Like, yeah, there were too many like things, too many like loose strands. I don't think they zoomed in enough on like one particular theme. Which again I think comes back to the fact that like the script just wasn't very good. Like it just was a bit confused.
And there was also the fact that there was not much foreshadowing of the final reveal, right? That okay, he actually was
There was none. There's
terrible.
no shadowing at all. Like that did not come across. Like his guilt about having committed a former crime, which had led to this anxiety that he felt throughout the film. Like that was just not. There was no indication of that. So when it did come around, it was just a bit like, what? Like, oh, okay, fine. So I thought that was a bit weird.
We haven't really talked about the cinematic qualities of the film yet. We talked about the themes, the characters, the screenplay. But I mean, on a film level, there was nothing there that really jumped out. There was the one shot where he's making fun of the groundskeeper, and then the camera slowly pans to the right, and we see the groundskeeper in the back.
That was good. Yeah.
But there was probably too many musical sequences which seemed a bit obvious, like with Sandstorm when he's in the car, and you're like, okay. Could have been a bit looser cinematically, maybe like a long take of the characters, maybe overlapping dialogue, some kind of ensemble feel. It kind of just felt quite flat in that respect.
Yeah, it suffered from like the BFI grant aesthetic problem, which is like you to get those grants, like I know people that have applied for them, you need to show exactly what you're going to do to like a letter, and then you do it. Like there's no room for improvisation and like I think even if you came to them with like a really conceived idea of what you want your film to look like, you might get paired with a cinematographer that's like being produced by the BFI, and they're like, no, we're going to do it like this. And you know what I mean? Like I felt that it was a screenplay that had images. You know what I mean? It did, like the actual fact that it was a film didn't really come across for me.
It could have been a play. It could have been a chamber drama. If you just take out a few of the sequences outside of the house and just focused on that, it felt like something you could watch Edinburgh Fringe.
Yeah, totally.
For better or for worse.
Yeah, that was like exactly what it felt like a kind of.
Yeah, it makes me wonder maybe like because they don't get very much money, and then making a film in the UK is expensive. You got to pay the cinematographer like £1,000 a day or something. So you don't have much time, like shooting days. If you, I talk to a lot of these filmmakers, and they're like, "Oh, I only had 10 days," and you're like, "Yeah, it shows." It felt like there was no time for them to really play around with ideas in terms of how to frame it. It did all feel like it was prevised almost exactly.
Exactly, yeah.
And then there was no messiness or capturing the messiness of life. Whereas the Ben Wheatley film, which I really liked, is all shot on handheld camera and is always cutting like quite a lot. It feels like a Dogma 95 film. So it has that sense of immersive realism, which really gets you under the skin of the characters and really gets you into them. Whereas this, I felt like it just didn't ever get me into the zone of the film. It felt very artificial as well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, cinematography, I don't have much to say about it for that reason. It just like it nah. But the thing is, I think that we're like slamming this film a lot, and I don't think that it was all bad, like at all.
No, I think
Like
there's a lot of clever stuff. I like the idea that he was mostly imagining all of it, and that there is a rational explanation for everything. But to do that, you have to have really clockwork plot, clockwork script,
yeah,
or you want to embrace the messiness of it and then allow it to cut loose. It does kind of half and half.
yeah, I agree.
So maybe with a different director. I noticed the guy who directed it was like mostly doing TV. He did Steph Let's Flats. Have you seen this show?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, I think again another thing interesting is that like in terms of like demographics of people who would watch this film, presumably would be like middle class and posh British people who I don't know if it would be particularly interesting for them to watch because everyone knows what that is. No working class person is going to watch that. I think surely it would just be so like long.
The audience would be mostly white as well, I think. I mean, there's
Yeah,
one
yeah,
person of color in the film, but
yeah.
it's never made into a thing. And she's also very
No,
posh. So I don't think that's really relevant. That's just casting. But there's no interrogation of that per se. And
yeah.
maybe I don't think they needed to be honest. But I guess that does limit the audience again somewhat.
But having said that, like how Downton Abbey is like massive in America, I I think like other cultures find our class system like interesting, or like that's what Britishness is to them. So,
yeah, fascinating.
like they would watch that and be like, oh, it's a British movie.
And that's
So
why
I can see that it would do well abroad, but
it's interesting. Most of the critical reaction, I feel that the Americans are sort of unanimously love the film, whereas the Brits are the ones trashing it. So maybe it's the British audience being harsher
yeah,
on their
it
own
makes sense.
people. One thing I think it didn't do is it didn't go far enough. Like this whole thing of Louise, who we haven't even mentioned yet, which is a tell.
Who's
Who
Louise?
Claire? Claire
The
Louise?
best girlfriend. Oh, the girl that tries to kill herself.
Yes. So I thought it would be much funnier if he and her hooked up before his girlfriend turned up, and then he was actually more horrible and self-absorbed the whole time. Instead, you're sort of sympathizing with him right until the end, and then you realize he's insane. But that's not as effective as if he was actually allowed to be a bit more complicated as a person.
Yeah. Like there's no conflict there for the audience in terms of liking him or not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, when he threw the vase at that guy's head, like that for me was pretty good. Like that was a cathartic moment in the movie. It didn't make me dislike him. I was like, yeah, fair enough.
But I thought that guy deserved it. He was really annoying.
Yeah, he was annoying.
And then there's sort of mixed reviews on Letterboxd. One of the most mean-spirited comedies in recent memory. I mean, do people not watch that much? Fuck, they made a film about me. 5 stars. Okay. I mean, Letterboxd is just sort of a lot of people writing about themselves as opposed to about the film. No, this is crap, and I won't be convinced otherwise. A boring slog watching a bunch of unlikable wankers with apparently no life and nothing interesting to say. Call each other mate an infinite number of times. I'm not even sure this is a real movie. Okay, that's just mean. I wouldn't go that far. It is a film, that's definitely sure. Maybe it could have been a short film, because I do see a lot of short films, directors who obviously talented in screenplay construction. What need was there for this to be 90 minutes? Could this have been done in half an hour without all the backstory?
Yeah, it could have been like a short film on a TV like channel 4 thing that just kind of comes on.
Short and snappy, yeah.
Yeah, just like it needed to kind of go out like an accordion in order to like make all these like links about his like, oh, is he crazy? Is he not? Yada yada yada. I feel like a short film they wouldn't have been able to pack all of that in, and like that was what the movie was like, seemingly.
But then it could
So
have.
I'm not sure if it would make it as a short, because I think this is the interesting thing. If it had been a short film, what were the themes of that movie, and could it have like put that across really quickly? I don't know. Like, there weren't really any themes
I would
to
tell
the
you
film except anxiety.
Half an hour is not a short time, to be honest. I don't think it could be 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But the basic idea is he thinks all his friends hate him. He has social paranoia. And
Yeah.
then it turns out, actually, no, he doesn't. And he has been sort of gaslighting himself.
Yeah.
Is it hard to do that in half an hour? You just cut out maybe the second girl character, you cut out one of the posh guys, you streamline it, you have a much snappier intro. I think you could get that through in half an hour. And then once you have the short, then you can maybe think about making a feature. That would be my view if I was in charge of funding at the BFI, but I'm not.
Mm-hmm. Another interesting thing was, this is completely off topic now, but
yeah,
what I was thinking about cinematography and like, which bits were good in the movie, like what looked okay. I felt that the bit where he opens the door to see his ex-girlfriend like sleeping and she's like naked, and then he's like, oh shit, like it looks like I'm like perving on her, and then shuts the door, and then the sort of the antagonist character kind of somehow has seen that, and then like says, why are you doing that, oh, looking at your ex-girlfriend.
No, I thought that was really effective, actually. And they have this big house, and the best shots are the ones that use the space of the house kind of well, like with the foreground, background, people in the back, and then you see them. Like the other shot I mentioned was also the same, right? Where you have either him looking or not looking, and then something else menacing is happening. And that's like using the horror tropes to create the sense of unease. But it only does that twice.
I
believe the thing with the axe and the chasing, that's kind of
shit.
That was really silly, wasn't it? Because what also known is he told the other guy to go away, and then the guy just comes back, and then it's like not mentioned, and you feel maybe he would have confronted him earlier, like properly, and try to get rid of him, and then the guy explains why he's staying, or he doesn't confront him. Maybe it would have been funny if he was much more mild-mannered, like he was impossible, like almost could not confront anyone whatsoever, and then right at the end it's like he cracks it. He seems just mildly irritated from the start, which is a hard thing to do well. And the writer is also the actor in the film, is the main character, Pete. It's Tom Staunton, so one of the two Toms. And I'm wondering if he can carry the whole film, because I'm not sure he's acted in much. There was this thing called like the High Renaissance Man, which they were in before. Oh, he's been in loads of films. Oh, he's really famous. Okay, fair enough. The main character, yeah. He's been in 60 movies. He's been in About Time.
Oh yeah, good movie.
Murder in Successville. He plays Vladimir Would you recommend, if someone has a BFI player, because I think it's been out in the cinema like last year, so you can't watch it in the cinema anymore, but if someone was like looking for something to watch, would you recommend watching this film?
Yeah, like there's better stuff you could watch. If you kind of like want to just like, if you've been out the night before, hangover, anxiety, it's like 7 o'clock, you don't really want to watch a film, but you don't want to watch TV, you could watch this as a happy medium. It's just kind of like, you then again, like what's the benefit of watching it? Like there's no joy in it. It actually makes you feel quite bad.
But it could make you reconsider your own friendships, and maybe
that's true.
Person that you hang out with out of obligation is actually no good for you anymore, and you've got to cut them out of your life entirely. So it does maybe serve a purpose, and it also tells you not to go to Somerset. It's in Somerset, right?
Yeah. Cider.
It's always
Or
these places,
Cornwall. I don't
isn't
know.
it? It's always like Cornwall, Somerset, or Norfolk. They never go to like
Sorry.
Rutland. Yeah, they never go to Box
Um,
Hill or Sussex. Because I think
yeah.
Sussex is far more terrifying than Somerset.
Yeah.
There's something
Um,
malevolent about East Sussex, that's for sure.
oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's a witchy place.
They're never in Lancashire. Sometimes they're in Scotland, but that's like, I think the kind of characters who'd be in Scotland in a house like this would be like even richer. Well, I don't think
Yeah.
these guys, I think these guys are super posh, but they're not like super duper posh. And there is a distinction.
They never like explore the origins of that house, like why it's
Yeah.
what built, what financed it, or anything like that. It's just kind of like assumed.
Yeah. And there should
Um,
be like some secrets of the house that maybe they uncover. For me, it's
that
just
it was
a
built by Slim.
massive lost opportunity.
Out of 5 stars, what do you give it?
3, 2.5, 2.5.
Why?
I think I give it 2.5 because I liked a lot of the themes. I like the idea of dramatizing this anxiety around your friends and then how it all comes together at the end. But I felt execution wise, it never really gripped me in the way it should have. And there were a few too many loose ends to really make it pop. And I've seen the same thing done better in other films. So, and yourself?
Yeah, pretty much exactly what you just said. I think 3 stars because unlike you, perhaps it did actually make me feel very anxious, extremely anxious, and it felt like it was touching on things that I've experienced, and therefore it felt quite close to home. So yeah, I thought in that sense it was pretty good, but yeah, execution was pretty god awful, and it did feel quite amateurish, and it did feel like a bunch of Edinburgh Fringe people that had got a BFI grant and then made a movie, which is exactly what it was. So yeah.
And that was Descent into Cinema with me, Redmond Bacon, and Fred Masters. Please tune in next time to see what we will talk about next.